Yo, what's going on, residents of the Mysta? This is KingTitanX here, new recruit to the Mysta clan. At least I assume I am. It is whatever. But basically, we're going to be doing what if Deku was a Tamaranian, or well, what if Deku was Starfire's brother? And of course, it would mean he would have the powers of Starfire and other Tamaranians as well. But before we get into the actual video, I would like to say that you guys should comment. You should comment below what you like about the video, or like what your expectations are going to be. Maybe leave a like as well. If you've been watching this channel for a little bit, hit that subscribe button, and we would appreciate it if you share the video to a couple of your friends as well. But beyond that, let's get on with the video.
Yeah, some days I feel unfazed, like when I'm with my friends with a cup raised. On Monday, I got a gun raised, suicidal do or die until hump day. Then I go right back at it like an automatic. More drinks, more songs, more beats to rap. I need a shrink, I'm gone, more time keeps passing. No watch, no thoughts at all, just a hat, new era. Rep my P's and those O's, need a Phillies with the orange and black to feel home. From Citizens Bank back to Camden Yards, it's a tale of two cities, and trust we go hard. Trust we go hard, yes we go hard. You said we go hard, I said we go hard. Rockin' my Bob Cousy, stocking up on the loose. The lyrics come easy, but the life is a doozy. And yes, I'm choosy, and no, I won't settle, but I still take pop off over that kettle, cause I'm talking bigger picture. And yes, I'm gonna hit you with the.
So this is going to be a bit of a weird what if, you could say, because of all the elements regarding Starfire. But when it comes on to this what if, basically what I'm going to say is this. What ends up happening is that Starfire, yes, she would still get captured and experimented on. The only difference here is the fact that Zuko would also be captured here. Deku, I would actually say, is the younger brother of Starfire. Yes, I know that they already do have a younger brother by the name of Wildfire, I believe. But we're going to say that when it comes down to Zuko, he's the youngest brother out of even them. He's even younger than Wildfire. What ends up happening in this situation is that while Starfire was captured, Zuko was also captured for experimentation. He was taken in for experimentation in order to see what would happen to the two different genders of the Tamaranians. What sort of effects would the experimentation give to them? After all, it would be interesting to see if it would be the same results or whether it would be different because of the genders. That's basically what would be going through the alien race's minds. Their captors, you could say. Well, of course, they're their captors. What ends up happening is that every day while Izuku is experimented on, he would also be thinking about how they would escape. Starfire would also be thinking about this, and once they actually did have an opportunity, they just busted out of there. Izuku was basically being carried by Starfire. He was like a baby in comparison. I would say that the age difference between Zuko and Starfire is around like 10. So Zuko, I'm going to say, is around 6 at this time. Zuko is 6 years old. Starfire is 16. I'm not sure if I'm necessarily having all of the, well, I'm not sure if I have like the timeline correctly put or anything. I'm basically just going freestyle. Essentially, I don't know what age Starfire was actually captured, all of those details and everything, but I'm just going to say that's the age Starfire is right now. Starfire and Izuku would have actually made it out, and they would have actually flown to Earth. That was the closest place at the time, especially with how that ship seemed to be damaged. There was some sort of meteor or something that hit the ship. There was something that caused the ship to go haywire. That was what ended up allowing them to find an opportunity to escape. With Earth being the very first place that they spotted their eyes on, they would just rush to that area without any sort of hesitation. They would crash onto Earth, and what ended up happening is that Izuku and Starfire would just be looking around. Sure, they would have caught the attention of some heroes, but at the same time, it looked like they were lost. The heroes were trying to communicate to Starfire and Izuku, trying to subdue them or something. Because could you really blame them? Could you really blame them in this situation? They literally saw two people just fly down from the sky and crash into the middle of the road, causing a huge disturbance. And one of them looks to be a little kid while the other looks to be a teenager. They were wondering if these were just some rebels that were just using their quirks illegally or something. They decided to try and put a hold to that. At least that's what was going through their minds. They thought that they actually had a chance, but they failed to realize that when it came on to Starfire, she was actually incredibly strong. She was able to actually fly with her brother in one arm and just have one other arm out at the same time, use all of these abilities of her own to actually make a run for it. She was capable of outpacing a lot of the heroes relatively quickly too. She was able to outpace them like in the very first 5 seconds, you could say. She was making a run for it. She was in a strange place with her little brother in hand, and she didn't speak a lick of their language. Although sure, it would be easy to actually communicate as soon as she could find somebody to make lip contact with and actually start to communicate a bit more. But she was on a strange planet still. She didn't know their customs or any of that. She was just trying to escape her pursuers right now. Izuku was confused as to what was going on himself. But they would just continue to fly. They would fly for quite a while until the likes of All Might would actually show up and actually try to do something. All Might would have actually went about the situation different from the other heroes. He wouldn't have kept a calm head over this time. He noticed that these two were still technically kids. Well, Izuku especially, he was a baby. He was pretty much a baby in comparison. While Starfire, she looked to be just a teenager. He would try and talk to her. He would try and communicate with her. He would put his hands up, saying that, and trying to signify that he meant no harm. Starfire would recognize that this is like some sort of ceasefire or something. Although she doesn't look like it, she is relatively smart. She's smart enough to recognize some customs. She's smart enough to recognize some things, but other things that she may get to have go over her head. She would have actually been a bit hesitant, but she would have allowed All Might to come close to them. He would try and communicate, but realized that she did not speak their language, and so he would try using sign language instead, or pictures actually. He would try using pictures, he would try drawing for her, all of these things. and she would start to get the memo. Basically, these guys were heroes, and they were just here to see what was going on. They didn't necessarily mean much harm. It's just that she just crashed into their planet technically, and well, caused quite a bit of commotion. So they couldn't really be blamed for their past actions, although she was still trying to communicate her side of the story. All Might would have some difficulty, but at the same time, he would start to understand what she's trying to say. Eventually, she just got annoyed and would just go to a random citizen and kiss them. Right then and there, she would have learned Japanese. She would have learned Japanese and then walked back over to All Might, now speaking to him in fluent Japanese. All Might would have been shocked, surprised, bamboozled, all of that in one go, but he would have been like, well, I don't necessarily approve of you doing that all of the time, but at the same time, it does make communication easier. So Starfire would explain her side of the story more efficiently now. She would speak to All Might, mentioning the fact that, well, she and her brother were actually aliens from a faraway planet by the name of Tamaran. Both of them were Tamaranians. They came to Earth in order to actually escape some of their captors. Some of these guys were basically trying to experiment on them, and she was doing this not out of her free will or anything along these lines. She just wanted to be in peace. She just wanted to have some sort of cover for a while until she found that the coast was clear and that she could probably return to her home planet. She would be willing to do practically anything, really, if it meant that she could stay on this planet and, well, have some sort of shelter for a while. Some food, water. Basically, she would be willing to help out on the planet in exchange for some sort of life on the planet. All Might would agree to these terms, and they would actually set her up with a new identity alongside her brother as well. They would actually sign her up for high school. Well, before they did that, they would actually cram a bunch of Japanese knowledge into her. And she would have some struggles at first, but she would get adjusted to it. When it came on to Izuku, he would have no issues. He would have no issues because of the fact that his brain isn't really all that developed yet. He's only 6 years old, so he would adapt pretty nicely. It would be a decent shift here. What ends up happening is that Izuku would, well, learn about many things about Japan. He would learn about their history. He would learn about quirks. He would learn about all of these things, and Starfire would be the one raising him. Starfire would be the main one raising her little brother Izuku. She would be raising him so that he would grow up to also know about the Tamaranian customs. She didn't want him to lose those important pieces of knowledge, important traditions, and all of that. She knew that he was, well, Tamaranian as well. He was her little brother. She couldn't afford for him to lack this sort of basic Tamaranian knowledge. And of course, Izuku would develop to know a lot more. He would actually be smarter than his big sis. He would be able to adjust to these sort of things easier. Not only be able to adjust easier, but he would also learn that he has powers as well. Originally, he would called it a quirk, but his sister would quickly correct. She would quickly correct him, saying that no, he doesn't have a quirk because he's not a human. What he has is, well, Tamaranian powers. These are powers gifted to him because of his lineage, because of his race, the Tamaranians, and a little bit of that experimentation that they had to go through when they were younger. By this time, I would say that 4 years had passed, so Izuku would have been 10 and Starfire would have been 20 years old. Starfire would have actually been running up as a hero. She would have had a bit of issues at first adjusting to being a hero, but once she got the grasp of everything, she would have adjusted accordingly. She would have actually been really popular. She was especially popular with the boys, if you know what I mean. When it comes down to her outfit, just imagine that she's wearing something from... Actually, you guys can just come up with whatever she's wearing. Anything from like the DC universe that she would primarily wear. Let's say that she wears any of that. It's just that, well, it's not as revealing as some of the other outfits that she's worn throughout comic history. She has like a little bit of closure when it comes on to that. Well, conservativeness, I mean to say, because of the laws that were put on to heroes thanks to Midnight stunt back in the day. Oh boy, that was a mess. And from that, we're going to say this. Izuku would have actually looked up to his sister here. He would have really looked up to his sister because of the fact that she was a pro hero. She was the one that was raising him since he was 6 years old. She was doing so much for him when she really didn't have to. She could have put him up for adoption or anything, because technically she was kind of young to be raising a child. She was only 16 at the time, and looking at the human customs, that's not something that's regular. That's not something that's really regular at all. But he really supported his sister all throughout these times. He really appreciated his sister for everything that she had done for him. Put clothes on his back, basically provide a shelter for him. Although, well, technically at first it was thanks to the heroes, but she was the one to have made these accommodations. She was the one to have gotten all of this set up in the very first place when they first arrived on Earth. She was the one that was able to get them food and water, all of these things, and she was getting an education on top of that. So he would have strived to become more like his sister in that regard. That was what caused him to want to become a hero in this timeline. Not necessarily All Might who was inspiring him, but it was his sister. Although yes, All Might did inspire Izuku a little bit, but he would quickly realize that his potential was far greater than the symbol of peace. And when it comes on to his sister, he would also realize that she was kind of hiding her strength to an extent. She was, what you could say, she was basically the number 2 hero at this point. The only reason why she wasn't above All Might was because of how aloof she could be at times. And the reason why she was above Endeavor was because of the fact that she was able to get a lot more done than even him. But at the same time, she had a bit of a dim-witted nature to her sometimes. Not necessarily dim-witted, but it could really come off as dim-witted sometimes, because she doesn't really know as much about the Earth as many others who had lived on the planet since birth would know. She's not adjusted to Earth like she is with Tamaran. So Izuku would actually continue to strive and learn about his powers. He would learn that he has similar powers to his sister. He had similar powers to his sister in where he could fly, he had super strength, he had basically invulnerability. Most things couldn't hurt him, although he suffered from like a bit of power instability, you could say. Sort of like sort of like Superman's son. I don't remember his name. What was it, like Jonathan Kent or something? But anyways, it doesn't quite matter. You guys would get the point. Basically, he would suffer from a bit of a power instability, and where his emotions could really affect him quite a bit. If he were to get angry or anything, his powers would actually become much stronger here. He would actually be more of a danger to humanity whenever he let his emotions get in his way. If he felt a lot of joy in a moment, he could actually fly up to the solar system or something. He could fly out of Earth's atmosphere, but thanks to the fact that he is Tamaranian, he could breathe in space. He didn't have to worry too much. It would be mainly hitting satellites and all of that. That would be the main concern. But another thing that Izuku would go through would be puberty, Tamaranian puberty, and where he would have laser eyes, essentially. He would be able to absorb radiation from different parts of the planet. He would be able to do that on top of the fact that he could also shoot star bolts from his hands as well. These star bolts were actually stronger than his sister's own, and these star bolts, they basically had the same effects as hers, but to a stronger degree. He was basically able to do the same things as her. He had the same destructive capability as her when he was 10 years old. Yeah, so that's basically it. That's the best way I could really describe it, but as he would continue to grow up, he would realize that they could cause huge explosions. And I know what you guys are wondering, what about Bakugo? What about Inko? What about these guys? Simply put, Izuku wouldn't have ever met Bakugo in this canon. He would have actually been at a different middle school, or a junior high, or whatever you guys call it in your countries. He would have gone through a majorly different childhood. He would have developed his physical strength, even though technically he doesn't really need to. He's already strong, but he figured that it would still be good to at least try and get his fitness up. He never knew what could happen. And of course, eventually he would arrive at the entrance exam. His sister wouldn't necessarily give him any sort of recommendation here, although Yue would try and push for it. She refused. She refused to give her brother a recommendation. Actually, I take that back. No. What ends up happening is that Starfire would have tried to give her brother a recommendation for Yue. She was number 2 hero after all. She had a bunch of influence at this point in time, and she knew that she was stronger than All Might as well. So All Might knew that the world would technically be in safe hands if he were to ever retire. But the thing about it here is that, well, one thing, Izuku refused the recommendation. He refused to have some sort of handout or anything along those lines. He wanted to prove his worth the old-fashioned way. He actually wanted to attend the UA entrance exams and really show them that when it comes on to Tamaranians, they aren't people to be messed with. He wanted to really show what the Tamaranians have. So of course he would go into the entrance. He would go into the auditorium. He would sit by just a random student, and he would listen to President Mike. Many students would actually be looking over to Izuku though and realize that he looks similar to the pro hero Starfire, and then they would begin to realize, oh snap, that's your little brother. And so some other kids would try and talk to Izuku, trying to see if he could score some, well, more specifically the pirates of the crowd. They would try and see if Izuku could score them a date with his sister. After all, she was really like the hottest heroine of Japan. Actually, the world. And of course, these guys would want to kind of mess with her. They wanted to score a date with his sister, but Izuku, he wasn't having any of that. He would have his eyes glow and signify that if they try to continue that stunt, he would use his eyes on them. He would shoot his lasers at these guys. He would shoot these energy beams at these guys and make them regret even coming close to him, trying to attempt to get with his sister in such a crude way. So Izuku would actually be called out by Ida for making a disturbance, but Izuku would also look over to Ida with a growl on his face and have his eye beams focused on Ida. He would look over to Ida and basically have an expression of, do you really want to mess with me now? Do you really want to mess with me right now, sir? Ida would just gulp and sit right back down. And yeah, that's basically how it happens. When it comes on to the written exam, Izuku would do fairly decent on here. I wouldn't say that he's necessarily as smart as he is in canon. Instead, well, actually he is. Just that he was also taught more about Tamaranian culture more than anything. So when it comes on to Japanese stuff, it's basically what happens when you try and teach a kid two languages from an early age. Some can adapt to it, others they would struggle in both languages because they get confused sometimes. So that's basically what would happen with Izuku, even with those years of experience in both languages. Even with his experience in both of these languages, he never actually kissed any girl. So, well, he would have had to learn the language the old-fashioned way. He would have had to learn not English, but Japanese the old-fashioned way, and that would be through just regular teaching and everything. So some words he would be confused on, and that's what caused him to have a lower grade than he probably could have had. When it came on to the practical exam, this is when things would go very, very different, because Izuku has a lot of powers here. And with his powers, he would basically just one-shot all the robots. As soon as President Mike said go, Zuko would float up into the air and just shoot through the sky. He would just be punching through so many robots all at once, literally just having them all stack on each other. He would be going so fast and he would be shooting his star bolts at some of the other robots. The next thing you know, what ends up happening is that almost all of the robots were basically destroyed right then and there. The very last thing that would happen is, of course, well, some of the students would still be rushing against at least some points. Even though this kid, Zuko, just destroyed most of their chances of getting into UA, they still had a little bit of hope left. And this would include a girl with a bob cut, a brown-haired girl by the name of Ochako Uraraka. And of course she would get trapped under the rubble. Once the teachers noticed that, oh snap, well, this Zuko kid really was not messing around. He literally took out most of the robots. There's only like 1% of the robots that were left over. He literally is just giving the kid to scraps at this point. He's literally feeding these guys as bones or something. Ochako would have been one of the few who was really trying to get some points still, but when the 0-pointer arrived and she was trapped under the rubble, she was not flexible enough to actually reach over and tap the rubble in order to get it off of her, unfortunately. But when it came on to Zuko, he would actually hear her cries for help, and he would immediately dispatch of the 0-pointer. Well, actually, first what would happen is that he would cram the rubble he would actually cram the rubble and pick it up off of Uraraka. He would throw it at the 0-pointer, actually having the rubble, that slab of rock, that slab of concrete, just be thrown into one of the 0-pointer's eye sockets. He would grab Uraraka and send it to a more safe location before going back over to the 0-pointer and literally shooting his star bolts at the creature. Not creature, but the machine. This would result in several large explosions. With how strong the star bolts are with Zuko, it would have actually been enough to really leave a whole bunch of dents in the 0-pointer. Actually, it was enough to literally destroy half of the robot, and everybody would just be watching Zuko in awe, amazement, all of that, because this kid just took down the 0-pointer in just a few moves, and he rescued the girl too. Like, they knew that he was the number 2 hero, Starfire's brother, but they weren't expecting that he would be this strong. So some of the guys would be looking at him in envy, while some of the girls would actually be kind of attracted to him, especially for his like goldenish kind of skin. This orange like skin, kind of like a tan, and they weren't used to guys in Japan having tans. Also, when it comes on to what they think about their race and all that, basically the whole thing about these guys being from another race, that's kept under lock. Most of the Japanese population doesn't necessarily know that Starfire and Zuko are actually aliens. To them, they assume they're just regular humans like the rest of them, but they were just, simply put, built different. They were simply built different to where they could have a bunch of energy manipulation. Basically, what the Japanese population assumed was that these guys had energy manipulation sort of quakes, but that's not really the case. That's just what the general population would assume. But there would be certain heroes that would have actually known that these guys were actually aliens. This would include the likes of All Might, Night Eye, Nezu actually as well. Aizawa, not yet. Actually, most of the heroes don't even know, so it's only going to be like the ones that are like at the very top, and exceptions like Night Eye and, well, Nezu. Nezu, he wouldn't have been told about this at first, but he would have figured it out quickly thanks to his superior intellect. And that's all I'm gonna be saying for right now. KingTitanX out.